I used to work as a custodian at a middle school for almost 5 years, usually on the overnight shift. I'd clock in around 10 at night and stay until right before sunrise, when the buses started pulling in. At first, I actually enjoyed the job. I didn't have to deal with kids running through the halls, teachers complaining, or really anyone at all. The quiet didn't bother me, and I liked being left alone to finish my work. But over time, I started noticing how different the school felt at night compared to during the day. It wasn't just quiet, it felt empty, almost dead. The building made these creaks and groans, like it was alive somehow, and when you're the only one there, even the smallest sound can put you on edge. A locker might pop open by itself, or the pipes in the walls would bang, and your mind would trick you into thinking it was footsteps. I got used to most of that, but there was one part of the school I never grew comfortable with: the basement. The school was old, built back in the 1950s, and the basement stretched under about half of it. Unlike the classrooms, it wasn't finished nicely. It was more like a concrete maze of storage rooms and long, narrow hallways with pipes and wires hanging overhead. Some rooms were packed with old desks, others with boxes of outdated textbooks, and some had piles of broken furniture stacked up. The air always smelled damp and musty down there. The fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered when they worked at all. Most of the time, you needed a flashlight just to see where you were going. When I first started, one of the older custodians told me to stay out of the basement unless I really had no choice. He said it wasn't worth the hassle and even joked that it was haunted. I laughed it off, but even in my first week, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling I had whenever I went down there. Compared to the bright hallways upstairs, it felt like stepping into a different world. Some nights I'd walk past the basement door and feel a chill just from seeing it, but most of the time, I didn't have to go down there, so I stayed away whenever I could. One night, about 2 years into the job, I had a list of tasks taped to my cart, and one of them was to bring up a set of folding chairs for an event. I groaned the second I saw it, because the only place those chairs were stored was in the basement. I remember standing at the top of the stairwell door for almost a minute, debating if I should call my supervisor and ask if it could wait until morning, but I didn't want to seem lazy, so I grabbed my flashlight and pushed open the heavy door. The stairwell echoed with every step I took, like my boots were way too loud in the empty space. When I reached the bottom, I flipped the switch, but only a few of the overhead lights flickered on, leaving most of the hallway in shadow. It smelled strongly of wet cement down there. I clicked on my flashlight and kept moving. The chairs were supposed to be in the second storage room on the left. The first room was crammed with old desks stacked almost to the ceiling. The second door was half rusted, and it screeched like nails on a chalkboard when I pulled it open. Inside, the air smelled like dust and old wood polish. The folding chairs were stacked against the wall in messy, uneven piles. I bent down and started pulling the chairs out, trying to grab as many as possible so I wouldn't need to make several trips. I had just lifted 4 when I froze. From somewhere out in the hallway, I heard a faint dragging sound, like someone slowly sliding their shoe across the floor. I held my breath, still crouched with the chairs in my arms, straining to listen. Then the sound stopped. I straightened up and stuck my head out into the hallway, shining the flashlight in both directions. The beam cut through the darkness, but nothing was there. My heart was pounding so hard, I could hear it in my ears. I stood there for what felt like forever, before finally convincing myself it was probably just the pipes, or maybe I had moved a chair without noticing. I carried the first load out into the hallway and started toward the stairs. As I walked, a sudden cold draft brushed across my face. It was so out of place that I stopped mid-step. The basement was always warm and stuffy, with no windows and no moving air, but this felt like standing in front of an open freezer. I swept my flashlight up and down the hallway, but nothing seemed different. Shaking it off, I set the chairs at the bottom of the stairs and headed back for more. When I walked into the storage room again, something felt off. The stack of chairs looked different somehow, like they had shifted while I was gone. I frowned at them, trying to remember exactly how they'd been leaning. I finally told myself I was just being paranoid and picked up another load. This time, as I turned to leave, I heard it again, a thump followed by a scraping sound. It came from farther down the basement hallway. My flashlight beam shook in my hand as I aimed it that way. About 20 feet down, one of the classroom doors that should have been closed tight was cracked open. Keep the length same, just change little bit wording, and please, easy to understand. My stomach sank. I knew I hadn't touched that door. The school was locked tight every night, and no one was supposed to be inside except me. I froze in the storage room doorway, staring at that cracked door. Every part of me wanted to drop the chairs and run upstairs, but I stayed put. I tried to calm myself, thinking, maybe the door came loose. Or maybe when I opened another one, the air pressure shifted. I held onto those excuses, like they were the only thing keeping me steady. I carried the chairs quickly to the stairwell, then returned with my flashlight in one hand, this time empty-handed. The cracked door was still there, open just enough for someone to peek through. My throat went dry. I crept toward it slowly, each step echoing in the hall. When I got close, I called out, "Hello, anyone down here?" My voice cracked, sounding weak in the wide, empty basement. No response. I swallowed hard, then pushed the door open quickly with my free hand and aimed the flashlight inside. The room was empty, just old science equipment covered in dust, boxes stacked high, and cobwebs in the corners. I stepped in for a moment, heart pounding, straining to hear anything. That's when I heard it again, a dragging shuffle. But this time, it came from behind me in the hallway. I spun around and aimed the flashlight down the corridor. Nothing, just shadows and concrete. But I felt it, that heavy pressure you get when you know you're being watched. My skin prickled all over. I didn't care about the chairs anymore. I backed up slowly, keeping the light pointed down the hallway, and made my way toward the stairwell. When I reached the stairs, I grabbed the chairs I'd left and hauled them up 2 at a time. I didn't stop until I was back in the main hallway upstairs, gasping for breath. I leaned against the wall, sweating even though the school was cold. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe it had been rats or the water pipes, but I couldn't explain the cracked door. I locked the stairwell door behind me, even though I wasn't supposed to, and I didn't go back down for the rest of the night. A week later, I was mopping the hallway right above the basement stairs when I heard it again. 3 loud bangs, evenly spaced, like someone hitting the wall with their fist. The mop slipped out of my hand, water dripping onto the tiles. I froze and listened. Then I heard the basement door rattle, like someone was pushing it from the other side. My blood ran cold. I didn't open it. I stood there, gripping the mop handle until the noise stopped. After that, I refused to go down into the basement by myself. If anything needed to be brought up, I'd wait until another custodian was around. I never told the others what I'd heard because I knew they'd either laugh or call it the so-called ghost. But I know what I felt, and I know what I heard. Even now, when I think about those slow, dragging footsteps behind me, it makes me feel sick to my stomach. I worked as a custodian at a high school for 3 years. Since I was the newest on the crew, I usually got stuck with the overnight shifts. The building was massive, 4 floors and 2 gyms. At night, when it was empty, it felt like a giant maze. The rule was to go floor by floor, room by room, shutting off lights, emptying trash, and locking doors. It normally took the whole night to get everything done, and if you tried to rush, you'd end up missing something. One Friday night, I was working by myself because another custodian had called in sick. Usually, we worked in pairs, so I wasn't used to being the only one on duty. At first, the shift seemed normal. I started on the first floor, emptying trash cans, wiping down surfaces, and mopping the hallways. Some of the old corridor lights flickered, making the shadows move around, but I told myself it was just the building settling. Around midnight, I headed up to the 3rd floor. That floor always gave me a bad feeling because it was quieter than the rest. There were a lot of older classrooms that weren't used anymore. Some were permanently locked, while others were turned into storage rooms filled with dusty books, broken furniture, and old lab equipment. As I walked down the hallway, I passed rows of lockers. The metallic clicks of the doors and the echo of my boots on the tiles made me jump more than once. I kept telling myself it was all normal. I was halfway through mopping one of the main halls when I noticed a door about 20 feet ahead standing open. That caught my attention right away because I had already checked every room earlier that evening and all of them had been locked. My first instinct was to hurry past it and ignore it, but something made me stop. I leaned my mop against the wall and slowly walked over, trying not to make any noise. The door was one of those old wooden classroom doors with a square glass window. I pushed it open slowly and shined my flashlight inside. The room looked empty. Desks were stacked along the walls, and boxes sat in the corners. At first, nothing seemed unusual, but then I noticed one box near the back wall had been shifted. It was tilted, no longer lined up with the others, and scuff marks on the floor showed it had been dragged across the tiles. My stomach dropped. I knew I had closed that door earlier, and I knew I hadn't touched that box. I told myself it was probably nothing, just my tired mind playing tricks on me. I pulled the door closed and went back to mopping, but I couldn't stop thinking about that room. I kept wondering if I should check the windows. Maybe a student had snuck in, but all the windows were locked from the inside, and the hallway doors were locked too. I tried to shrug off the feeling of being watched and focused on the cleaning. After I finished that hallway, I headed down the stairwell to the second floor. As I walked past that same classroom again, my heart nearly stopped. The door stood wide open. My breath caught in my throat. I knew I had shut it earlier. I moved closer slowly and peered inside. The room looked normal, except that the box was now sitting in the center of the floor. My pulse raced. I whispered, "Hello, who's in here?" My voice sounded tiny in the empty building. I waited, but there was only silence. Then, from the back of the room, I heard slow, deep breathing. It wasn't a gust of wind or the pipes. It sounded like someone trying to stay quiet, but still making sure I heard it. I tried to tell myself it was just a student hiding, maybe pulling a prank, but how could they have gotten in? I was the only one who was supposed to be there, and all the doors were locked. I slammed the door shut and sprinted down the hallway to the stairwell. My heart was pounding and sweat ran down my back. I pressed myself against the stairwell door, listening. I debated calling my supervisor, even though I hated disturbing him in the middle of the night. Finally, I called him. When he answered, I told him what was happening and tried to keep my voice steady. He said he'd be there in 20 minutes. Those 20 minutes felt like hours. I stayed as far away from that room as I could, peeking over my shoulder every few seconds. Eventually, he arrived. We went back up together. He had a big flashlight and walked straight into the classroom. The box was still sitting in the middle of the floor. We searched everywhere, the closets, under the tables, behind the desks, but there was nothing. He told me I was probably just tired or imagining things. I didn't argue, but I knew what I'd heard, that slow, heavy breathing. I tried to finish the rest of my shift with him there, but I kept glancing back at that classroom. The hallway felt colder and more oppressive than before. Even sweeping and mopping couldn't distract me. Every time I passed the lockers, I expected one to swing open. Every shadow looked like someone standing just out of sight. Mentioned that years ago, a student had been caught hiding in that classroom overnight. They had snuck in to pull a prank, but it scared the staff so badly that the room was never used again. That story made some sense, but it didn't explain the breathing I heard that night. There had been no one else in the school. I finished my shift and left, but every time I thought about it afterward, my stomach tightened. I started taking extra precautions. I made sure every door was locked as I went by. I kept my flashlight pointed at the floor and stayed close to the stairwell when I had to pass that hallway. Months later, I had another overnight shift alone and avoided that third floor as long as I could. When I finally had to go up, I moved as fast as I could, always expecting to hear it again. The feeling of being watched never went away. Even when I was in a room far from that classroom, I felt like eyes were on me. Every creak in the floor made me jump. I finished the shift and left quickly, never looking back. I refused to work that floor alone again. Even years later, I avoided it whenever I could. I never found out whether it had been a student hiding or something else. But I'll never forget the sound of that breathing coming from a classroom that should have been empty. I can still hear it in my head sometimes.